I'm going to be speaking a little bit today on the natural versus the artificial grid, something that I've been studying for a while. I put out a video, I guess, about 2 years ago with some of the psychological things that we have to deal with and some of the deeper issues, but I'm going to go even further into how we can discern between the natural and the artificial grid and why it's important and what that entails. And I'm going to be reading material from The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life by Arthur Firstenberg. And I'm going to be reading from chapter 9, titled Earth's Electric Envelope. And I'm just going to read portions of that and then make some commentary. I've read this chapter quite a few times just in the last few days, really going over the importance of this material. I mean, the whole book is really important, and I highly recommend that everybody pick up a copy and start reading, because a lot of the issues that we're facing today seem sort of abstract, and this book gathers so much scientific evidence towards the implications of starting from the 1800s, like the implementation of the worldwide electrical grid, like how that started, how we began to play around with electricity, and how that changed the face of the earth, and how it also affected humans globally, and all the implications of that. Like, there's just so many. I'm not going to mention everything. I really recommend picking up the book, but I do want to go deep into this chapter, because this chapter, for me, really kind of solidified a lot of the information that I already knew, that came in on this sort of just knowing, being able to sense and feel. And I can't really say it better than how it's said in this book. So I'm going to start reading some of the information and then add in a few of my own personal notes into it. So the chapter starts off with a little poem by Frances Thompson in The Mistress of Vision. All things by mortal power, near or far, hiddenly, to each other linked are, that thou canst not stir a flower without troubling a star. And so we know that the world is all connected, right, through this invisible web. We're going to dive into what that means. When I look up into the night sky, the stars appear as points of color twinkling through Earth's atmosphere. Everywhere else, except for the moon and a few planets, is blackness. But it is the blackness of illusion. If you could see all the colors in the world, including the ultraviolets that honeybees can see, the infrareds that snakes can see, the low electric frequencies that catfish and salamanders can see, the radio waves, the X-rays, the gamma rays, the slow galactic pulsations, if you could see everything that is really there in its myriad shapes and hues, in all of its blinding glory, instead of blackness, you'd see form and motion everywhere, every day, every night. So, right here, we can understand that if we had an expanded sense of perception, which some of us do, some of us can hear electricity, some of us can really hear the sound of nature, right? The sound of the sun, the sounds of not only like things that are within normal perception, right? Normal sensory perception, but even outside of that, they're there. We don't necessarily all hear them, but they're still there, and they're moving and interacting with us. Almost all the matter in the universe is electrically charged, an endless sea of ionized particles called plasma, named after the contents of living cells because of the unpredictable, lifelike behavior of electrified matter. The stars we see are made of electrons, protons, bare atomic nuclei, and other charged particles in constant motion. The space between the stars and galaxies, far from being empty, teems with electrically charged subatomic particles, swimming in vast swirling electromagnetic fields, accelerated by those fields to near light speeds. Plasma is a good conductor of electricity, far better than any metals. That filaments of plasma, invisible wires, billions of light years long, transport electromagnetic energy in gigantic circuits from one part of the universe to another, shaping the heavens. Under the influence of electromagnetic forces over billions of years, cosmic whirlpools of matter collect along these filaments, like beads on a string, evolving into the galaxies that decorate our night sky. In addition, thin sheaths of electric current, called double layers, like the membranes of biological cells, divide intergalactic space into immense compartments, each of which can have different physical, chemical, electric, and magnetic properties. There may even, some speculate, be matter on one side of the double layer and antimatter on the other. Enormous electric fields prevent the different regions of space from mixing, just as the integrity of our own cells is preserved by the electric field of the membranes surrounding them. Our own Milky Way, in which we live, a medium-sized spiral galaxy 100,000 light years across, rotates around its center once every 250 million years, generating around itself a galactic-sized magnetic field, filaments of plasma, 500 light years long, generating additional magnetic fields, have been photographed looping out of our galactic center. So we can fine-tune our vision to sort of see, this substance that relates to the substance in the body, like the connective tissue of the body. And within that connective tissue, there are places, strings, where electricity can travel. So similar to the body, there are points in the body, acupuncture points in the body that have less resistance to electricity, and that's where the electricity flows through the body. But we'll get to that more in a little bit. Our sun, also made of plasma, sends out an ocean of electrons, protons, and helium ions in a steady current called the solar wind. Blowing at 300 miles per second, it bathes the Earth and all of the planets before diffusing out into the plasma between the stars. The Earth, with its core of iron, rotates on its axis in the electric field of the solar system and the galaxy. As it rotates, it generates its own magnetic field and traps and deflects the charged particles of the solar wind. They wrap the Earth in an envelope of plasma called the magnetosphere, which stretches out on the night side of the planet into a comet-like tail, hundreds of millions of miles long. Some of the particles from the solar wind collect in layers we call the Van Allen belt, where they circulate 600 to 35,000 miles above our heads. Driven along magnetic lines of force towards the poles, the electrons collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms in the upper atmosphere. These fluoresce to produce the northern and southern lights, the aurorae borealis and australis, that dance in the long winter nights of the high latitudes. The sun also bombards our planet with ultraviolet light and X-rays. These strike the air 50 to 250 miles above us, ionizing it, freezing the electrons that carry electric currents in the upper atmosphere. This, the Earth's own layer of plasma, is called the ionosphere. And so for some of you that have potentially listened to some of my previous videos, the ionosphere is sort of like the collective unconscious, and it's where a lot of our like thought forms, the the thoughts are producing electricity, and that interacts with the atmosphere and specifically the ionosphere to create this kind of sheath over the planet that is a collection of all our thoughts, past and present, but specifically, present. And so we're constantly interacting with the ionosphere, and it can be considered like sort of the collective mind, right? So we're all affected by it. And depending what thoughts are being pumped into the ionosphere will determine thoughts that are reflected back down into the human psyche. So to continue on, the Earth is also showered with charged particles from all directions called cosmic rays. These are atomic nuclei and subatomic particles that travel at velocities approaching the speed of light. From within the Earth comes radiation emitted by uranium and other radioactive elements. Cosmic rays from space and radiation from the rocks and soil provide the small ions that carry the electric currents that surround us in the lower atmosphere. In this electromagnetic environment, we evolved. We all live in a fairly constant vertical electric field, averaging 130 volts per meter. In fair weather, the ground beneath us has a negative charge. The ionosphere above us has a positive charge. And the potential difference between ground and sky is about 300,000 volts. The most spectacular reminder that electricity is always playing around and through us, bringing messages from the sun and stars, is, of course, lightning. Electricity courses through the sky above us, explodes downwards in thunderstorms, rushes through the ground beneath us, and flows gently back up through the air in fair weather, carried by small ions. All of this happens continuously as electricity animates the entire Earth. About 100 bolts of lightning, each delivering 1 trillion watts of energy, strike the Earth every second. During thunderstorms, the electric tension in the air around us can reach 4,000 volts per meter and more. When I first learned about the global electric circuit 25 years ago, I drew the following sketch to help me think about it. Living organisms, as the drawing indicates, are part of the global circuit. Each of us generates our own electric fields, which keep us vertically polarized like the atmosphere. With our feet and hands negative with respect to our spine and head, our negative feet walk on the negative ground as our positive heads point to the positive sky. The complex electric circuits that course gently through our bodies are completely by ground and sky. And in this very real way, the earth and sun, the great yin and the great yang of the Yellow Emperor's classics, are energy sources for life. So we start to get an idea here about the importance of the poles within the body, and how they relate to the natural poles, being the earth and the sky, and how that natural state maintains the integrity of our biology, of our physiology, even our state of mind. So carrying on, it is not widely appreciated that the reverse is also true. Not only does life need the earth, but earth needs life. The atmosphere, for example, exists only because green things have been growing for billions of years. Plants created the oxygen, all of it, and very likely the nitrogen too. So there is there is something here talking about how we are nature itself, right? Everything is a reflection, and we're slowly learning about that, but we are essentially part of nature. And we are part of this greater cosmos through this exchange of ions, and electrical forces. So to carry on, we're all part of a living Earth, as the Earth is a member of a living solar system and a living universe. The play of electricity across the galaxy, the magnetic rhythms of the planets, the 11-year cycle of sunspots, the fluctuations of the solar wind, thunder, and lightning upon this earth, biological currents within our bodies, and one depends upon all the others. We are like tiny cells in the body of the universe. Events on the other side of the galaxy affect all life here on Earth. And it is perhaps not too far-fetched to say that any dramatic change in life on Earth will have a small but noticeable effect on the sun and stars. So there's a reciprocal nature happening, between living life on Earth and these living beings, right? These planets and other centers that are producing energy. There's a reciprocal nature. When the City of South London Electric Railway began operating in 1890, it interfered with the delicate instruments at the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, 4.5 miles away. Little did the physicists there know that electromagnetic waves from that railway and every other electric railway were also radiating into space, altering the Earth's magnetosphere, a fact that would not be discovered until decades later. To understand its significance for life, let us first return to the story of lightning. So here we get the first understanding of what we were building in terms of, artificial machines that produce electricity, and are playing now with, ions, and the magnetic charge of things is also radiating into space. The house we live in, which is a biosphere, the roughly 55-mile-high space filled with air that wraps around the Earth, is a resonant cavity that rings like a gong every time a lightning bolt strikes. In addition to maintaining the static electric field of 130 volts per meter, in which we all stand and walk, and in which birds fly, lightning sets the biosphere ringing at particularly low frequency tones, 8 beats per second, or hertz, 14, 20, 26, 32, and so forth. These tones are named for Winfried Schumann, a German physicist who predicted their existence and who, with his student Herbert Koenig, proved their constant presence in the atmosphere in 1953. It so happens that in a state of awake relaxation, our brains tune to these precise frequencies. The dominant pattern of a human electroencephalogram from before birth through adulthood, a well-known alpha rhythm ranging from 8 to 13 hertz or 7 to 13 hertz in a newborn, is bounded by the first 2 Schumann resonances, an old part of the brain called the limbic system, which is involved in emotions and in long-term memory, produces theta waves of 4 to 7 hertz, which are bound above the first Schumann resonance. The theta rhythm is more prominent in young children and in adults in meditation. These same frequencies, alpha and theta, with surprisingly little variation, pulsate, so far as is known, in all animals. In a state of relaxation, dogs show alpha rhythm, identical to ours, of 8 to 12 hertz. In cats, the range is slightly wider, from 8 to 15. Rabbits, guinea pigs, goats, and cows, frogs, birds, and reptiles all show nearly all the same frequencies. So right here, there's a demonstration about how basically when we're in a healthy alpha state, which is an alert state where we're thinking clearly, our brains are pulsing at the exact same frequency as the pattern of the Earth, and the Earth maintains its frequency through this like homeostasis with the environment, right? So everything's connected, and if the Earth is in homeostasis, then there's a sound, which is an 8 hertz, that is a natural healthy state that we then replicate, right, in a healthy state where we can think clearly, and so on and so forth. Schumann's student, Koenig, was so impressed by the resemblances these atmospheric waves bear to the electrical oscillations of the brain that he conducted a series of experiments with far-reaching implications. The first Schumann resonance, he wrote, is so completely identical to the alpha rhythm that even an expert is hard-pressed to tell the difference between the tracings from the brain and the atmosphere. Koenig did, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Koenig did not think this was a coincidence. The first Schumann resonance appears during fair weather, he noted, in calm, balanced conditions, just as the alpha rhythm appears in the brain in a calm, relaxed state. The delta rhythm, on the other hand, which consists of irregular, higher amplitude waves around 3 Hz, appears in the atmosphere under disturbed, unbalanced weather conditions, and in the brain in disturbed or diseased states, headaches, spastic conditions, tumors, and so forth. So, in an experiment involving nearly 50,000 people attending a traffic exhibition in Munich in 1953, Koenig was able to prove that these later types of disturbed waves, when present in the atmosphere, significantly slow human reaction times, when the 8 Hz Schumann wave do just the opposite. The larger the Schumann signal in the atmosphere, the quicker people's reactions were on that day. Koenig then duplicated these effects in the laboratory. An artificial field of 3 Hz delta range slowed human reactions, while an artificial field of 10 Hz alpha range accelerated them. Koenig also noted that during the 3 Hz exposure, some of his subjects complained of headaches, fatigue, tiredness, tightness in their chest, and sweating from their palms. So already in 1953, they are able to duplicate these natural rhythms with, artificially. And so that gives us a clue about, our capabilities and sort of how all of these different things can be used and manipulated depending on who is using them. In 1965, James R. Hammer published the results of experiments along these same lines that he had conducted for Northrop Space Laboratories in an article which he titled Biological Entrainment of the Human Brain by Low-Frequency Radiation. Like Koenig, he showed that frequencies above 8 Hz quickened reaction times, while lower frequencies had the opposite effect. But he went further. He proved that the human brain could distinguish between frequencies that differed only slightly from each other, but only if the signal was weak enough. When he reduced the signal strength to 0.0038 volts per meter, which is close to the value of the Earth's own fields, 7.5 Hz had a significantly different effect than 8.5 Hz and 9.5 Hz, then to 10.5 Hz. Lightning is not yet done with its repertoire. In addition to the static field we walk in and the low frequencies that speak to our brains, lightning also provides us with a steady symphony of higher frequencies called atmospherics, or just spherics, which reach thousands of cycles per second. They sound like twigs snapping if you listen to them on a very low frequency radio, and usually originate in thunderstorms that may, however, be thousands of miles away. Other sounds called whistlers, resembling the descending tones of a sliding whistle, often originate in thunderstorms on the opposite end of the Earth. Their falling tones are produced during the long journey these waves have taken as they are guided along magnetic field lines into outer space and back to Earth in the opposite hemisphere. These waves may even bounce back and forth many times from one end of the Earth to the other, resulting in trains of whistles that seemed so unworldly when they were first discovered in the 1920s that they generated newspaper articles with not so inappropriate titles like Voices from Outer Space. Among the other sounds one may hear, especially at higher latitudes, originating somewhere in the electrical environment of our planet, are a steady hiss and a dawn chorus, are a steady hiss and a dawn chorus, so named because its resemblance to chirping birds. Both of these sounds rise and fall gently every 10 seconds or so with the slow pulsations of the Earth's magnetic field. So some of you this might be sparking some memories for some of you, or even just removing the veils of, our experience of this symphony that's all around us all the time. And for those that are disturbed by the artificial sounds, you are most likely also able to tune into these natural sounds and the symphony happening all around you, and the beauty of nature on that level, on an electromagnetic frequency level, where not only can you see the beauty, but also hear it, and potentially, completely be able to tap into that cosmic song that's playing. And our ancestors, I know, because when I tune into past lives, I remember hearing the language of, the songs of the plants, the songs of the sun, the songs of all the living creatures around me. And I can still tap into that to a certain degree. Although it's very difficult when you start opening up your senses, because of all these artificial sounds that are, penetrating our magnetic sphere, electromagnetic sphere, and then that's what we describe as the frequency fence that is around us, is preventing us from truly hearing the songs of nature that are playing constantly. So to carry on, it says this VLF symphony bathes our nervous system. Its frequencies range roughly from 200 to 30,000 hertz, span the range of our auditory system, and also, as Connie observed, include the frequencies of the impulses that our brains send to our muscles. The effect our VLF environment has on our well-being was resoundingly demonstrated by Reinhold Ritter in 1954, when he tabulated the results of a number of population studies that he and his colleagues had conducted in Germany, involving 1 million people. Births, deaths, suicides, rapes, work injuries, traffic accidents, human reaction times, amputees, pains, and complaints of people with brain injuries all rose significantly on days with strong VLF spherics. Our VLF environment regulates biological rhythms in both humans and animals. Golden hamsters, which have been popular since the beginning, since the 1930s. Okay, so he goes on to say our VLF environments regulate biological rhythms in humans and animals. And then he cites a study with hamsters discussing how they were able to regulate whether or not hamsters went into hibernation, but only through, putting the hamster in a Faraday cage and then slowly introducing the natural frequencies back into the cage, by just removing food, changing the conditions, making it really cold. Like, nothing really put the hamster into hibernation, other than these natural frequencies, right, that are in the environment, these VLF spherics that are really attuning us, right? They're attuning our biological rhythms on a whole other level, that can't be, replaced or substituted with something else. And so during the following 2 months, the researchers were able to put the animal into and out of hibernation by introducing or removing either the natural outdoor frequencies or artificial VLF fields that imitated the natural winter patterns. So by changing the VLF fields around the human artificially is really affecting us on a deep level? Does it put certain aspects of ourselves into hibernation? This is what the studies, help us start to question. One way to find out if the Earth's natural fields are as important to people as to hamsters would be to place human subjects in a completely shielded room for a few weeks and see what happens, which is exactly what behavioral psychologist Rutger Wever did at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. In 1968, he had an underground building constructed containing 2 isolated chambers. Both were carefully shielded against outside light and sound, and one was shielded also against electromagnetic fields. During the next 2 decades, hundreds of people had their sleep cycles, body temperature, and other internal rhythms monitored while they lived in one or the other of these rooms, usually for a month at a time. Weaver found that even without any variation in light and darkness, and without any clocks or time cues, the body's sleep cycle and internal rhythms remained close to 24 hours. So long as the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields were present. However, when those fields were excluded, the body's rhythms usually became longer, erratic, and desynchronized with each other. The average free-running sleep cycle was 25 hours. In individual cases, were as short as 12 hours and as long as 65 hours. Variations in body temperature, potassium excretion, speed of mental processes, and other rhythms drifted at their own separate rates, completely different from one another, and no longer coincided with the sleep-wake cycle at all. But as soon as an artificial 10 Hz signal, close to the first Schumann resonance, was introduced into the shielded room, the body's rhythms all immediately resynchronized to a 24-hour period. So, what are the implications of this, right? Like the being connected to the natural grid is so intricately woven with our, the basic needs that we have, right? These basic biological rhythms and cycles that keep us healthy. I'll carry on. Life residing between heaven and earth partakes of both polarities. As we will see in the next chapter, the distribution of electric charge in living beings has been measured and mapped eternally. In plants, this was done by Professor of Anatomy Harold Saxton Burr at Yale University, and in animals by orthopedic surgeon Robert O. Becker at the State University of New York, Upstate Medical Center, Syracuse. The areas of greatest positive voltage in animals are at the center of the head, the heart, and the lower abdomen, and in trees, the crown. The place of greatest negative voltage in trees are at the roots, and in animals, the 4 feet, and at the end of the tail. These are the places where the global electrical circuit enters and leads the body on its way between heaven and earth, and the channels through which the electricity travels inside living beings, distributing the electricity of heaven and earth to every organ, were precisely mapped several thousand years ago and are part of a body of knowledge that we know today as the Chinese acupuncture. So many of you who are into astrology might understand this. We relate different planets to different organs, right? So as within, as without, and this is where it really plays in, where we can understand it on the scientific level. I'm going to read that again just so we can really absorb that. These are the places where the global electrical circuits enter and leave the body on its way between heaven and earth, and the channels through which the electricity travels inside living beings, distributing the electricity of heaven and earth to every organ, were precisely mapped several thousand years ago. Okay, so we've had this knowledge. It hasn't been widely accepted, but we're going to get into why it's going to become accepted in the scientific arena now and why they have no choice to start accepting this. So it was written down in the Hugandi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine between 500 and 300 BC. The very names of key acupuncture points reveal an understanding that the circuitry of the body is continuous with that of earth and sky. Kidney 1, for example, the point underneath the foot in the center of the sole, is known in Chinese as the Yongquan, meaning bubbling spring. Because earth energy bubbles up into the feet through these points and climbs up the leg into the rest of the body towards the heavens. Governing vessel 20, the point on top of the head, is in the center, is called Bai Hui, the 100 convergences. This is also the 1,000-petal lotus of Indian tradition, the place where the energy of heaven descends into our body towards the earth, and the flows of our body converge and reach toward the sky. But not until the 1950s did scientists begin with Yoshio Nakatani in Japan and Reinhold Voll in Germany begin to actually measure the electrical conductivity of acupuncture points and meridians, and to finally translate the word qi, formerly spelled qi, into modern language. It means electricity. So, Hsiao Tusung Lin is a professor of chemical and material science at National Central University in Taiwan. The qi that flows through our meridians, he tells us, is an electrical current that brings both power and information to our cells. Current whose source is both internal and external. Every acupuncture point has a double function: as an amplifier for the internal electrical signals, boosting their strength as they travel along the meridians, and as an antenna that receives electromagnetic signals from the environment. Right? So we're receiving electromagnetic signals from the environment. So what signals are we receiving? Are we receiving them from the natural grid? Or are we receiving them from the artificial grid? Right? And this is basically the frequency war that we're in right now. So this here connects to the Dacians, or energy centers of Chinese medicine, and located in the head, the heart, and the abdomen. Equivalent to the chakras of Indian tradition are electromagnetic oscillators that resonate at particular frequencies and that communicate with the meridians and regulate their flow. They have capacitance and inductance, like oscillators, in any electronic circuitry. The body, says Lin, is a super complex electromagnetic oscillation network, enormously intricate and delicate. In 1975, Becker and his colleagues at Upstate Medical Center found that, in general, acupuncture points are not only places of low resistance, but of high potential, averaging 5 millivolts higher than the surrounding skin. They also found that the path of the meridian, at least on the surface of the body, has significantly greater conductivity and lower electrical resistance than nearby skin. So as a result of the work of Nakatani, Voll, Becker, and others, acupuncture using microamp currents has taken its place alongside traditional acupuncture. Anyway, and they go into that, but basically, it's just proving. The whole thing was about proving that, there's these meridians that work with electricity connected to the cosmos, connected within and without. At the Shanghai University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, the Fujian Institute of Traditional Chinese Medicine, and elsewhere in China, scientists continue to confirm that the substance that flows in our meridians is electricity, and that electricity is not only a force that moves locomotives, but is the incredible complex and delicate stuff of life. Typically, the electrical resistance of an acupuncture point is 6 to 2 times lower than the resistance of surrounding skin, meaning it's taking an electricity. The lower the resistance, the more it is a point of invitation, right, where it's inviting that energy in. Okay, so we're about halfway done here. I am going to take a little break from reading, and I will be back. Letting this stuff sink in is so important. This is just confirming so much of the knowledge that we know already. And I find it like really despicable that when you go on to Wikipedia, for example, they still discredit like Chinese medicine as like woo woo. And I think slowly, the paradigm is going to continue to shift as they keep on bringing these studies forward that reinforce the idea of, our bodies being even more connected to our environments on this really subtle, low frequency level. Not just, the food we consume and the really obvious things in the environment, but all of these low frequency vibrations that we're sensing and feeling, and why we have to continue to address the artificial grid versus the natural grid. So I shall be back. All right, so I'm going to jump back in here and continue reading from page 125. I'm halfway done. And I think it's really important that I get through this whole chapter. And then maybe I can put out a video later on where I'm discussing some of these points in more detail. But this is really getting into the nitty gritty of the natural versus the artificial grid and why it's so important to continue speaking on this topic. So the physical structures of the conductive points and meridians have been tentatively identified. In the 1960s, a North Korean physician, Bong-han Kim, published detailed photographs of an entire network of tiny corpuscles and thread-like structures that connected them, that exist throughout the body, in our skin, in our internal organs and nervous system, and in and around our blood vessels. These ducts, he found, were electrically conductive, and the fluid within them, surprisingly, contained large amounts of DNA. Their electrical pulsations were considerably slower than the heartbeat. In the skin of a rabbit, the pulsation rate was between 10 and 20 per minute. The pathways of the superficial ducts in the skin matched the classical pathways of the acupuncture meridians. The reason Kim succeeded in identifying this system is that he worked only on living animals, because the ducts and corpuscles, almost transparent to begin with, disappeared shortly after death. He stained the living tissue with unspecified blue dye that was absorbed only by this network of ducts and corpuscles. Kim's book on Kyungrak system was published in Pyongyang in 1963. The reason his work has been so completely ignored has partly to do with his relations with North Korean government. Kim was expunged from official records in 1966, and rumor has it that he has committed suicide, and partly with the fact that the outside world does not want to find physical proof of our electrical nature. So that is completely true. It's like shifting paradigms, right? So things are so slow to change because of all the red tape. Okay, continuing on. But in the mid 1980s, Jean-Claude Darret, a French physician working in the nuclear medicine department at Necker Hospital in Paris, replicated some of Kim's experiments. He injected a radioactive dye containing technetium 99 into various acupuncture points on the feet of volunteers, and found that the dye migrated precisely along the meridian pathways of classical acupuncture, just as Kim had found. In 2002, Consupso, who had already been investigating the electromagnetic properties of acupuncture meridians, headed up a team at Seoul National University in South Korea, which looked for and found most of the thread-like duct system described by Kim. A breakthrough came in November 2008 with the discovery that trypan blue, a dye that was previously known to stain only dead cells, if injected into living tissue, would stain only the nearly invisible threads and corpuscles they had painstakingly begun to identify. So the primovascular system, as it was now called, suddenly became a subject of research in other centers in South and North Korea, as well as China, Europe, Japan, and the United States. The ducts and corpuscles of this system were found, just as Kim had described, resting on the surface of and penetrating inside the internal organs, floating inside the large blood and lymphatic vessels, winding along the outside of major blood vessels and nerves, traveling inside the brain and spinal cord, and following the paths of the known meridians within the deep layers of skin. When the surface of the skin was stained with the dye, only points along the meridians absorbed it. In September 2010, at the first International Symposium of Primovascular System held in Jecheon, Korea, Satoru Fujiwara, retired professor of anatomy at Osaka City University, Japan, reported tentative success at surgically identifying a superficial primo node, an acupuncture point in the skin of a rabbit's abdomen. And in 2015, researchers at Seoul National University used a commercially available staining kit to reveal a thread-like vessel running just beneath the abdomen skin of anesthetized living rats. The vessel, colored blue from the stain, followed the pathway of acupuncture meridian called the conception vessel and connected discrete corpuscles corresponding in location to the known acupuncture points on that meridian. The fine structure of this system of nodes and ducts was revealed by electron microscopy. The staining process, they noted, takes less than 10 minutes. In the early 1970s, atmospheric physicists finally woke up to the fact that the Earth's magnetic field was highly disturbed. Not all of those whistles, hiss, chorus, lion, roars, and other colorful sounds that they had been listening to for half a century were caused by nature. This discovery came about as a result of efforts to deliberately alter the Earth's electromagnetic environment, efforts that have been culminated today in the operation of Project HARP, located in Jacona, Alaska. Under contract with the Office of Naval Research, scientists at Stanford University Radio Science Laboratory had built a 100 kilowatt VLF transmitter at Sipple Station, Antarctica, broadcasting in the 1.5 to 16 kilohertz range. The purposes of the 13-mile-long antenna that stretched over the frozen ice, according to Robert Halliwell, was one of the members of the Stanford team, included control of the ionosphere, control of the radiation belt, and new methods of VLF and ULF communication. It had been discovered accidentally in 1958 that VLF transmissions originating on the Earth interact with particles in the magnetosphere, stimulating them to emit new VLF waves, which can then be received at the opposite end of the Earth. The purpose of the Stanford project was to do this deliberately, to inject sufficient quantities of very low frequency energy into the magnetosphere so that it would not only trigger new waves, but that these triggered waves might in turn cause electrons to rain out of the Earth's radiation belt into the atmosphere, altering the properties of the ionosphere for military purposes. Now, if you remember back to what I said about how we're naturally synchronizing with the ionosphere for other purposes regarding the mind. So I'm going to go on to continue reading here. A primary goal of the Department of Defense was to devise a method of stimulating the ionosphere to emit VLF, very low frequency, ELF, extra low frequency, or even ULF, ultra low frequency waves, in order to communicate with submarines submerged beneath the oceans. The VLF transmitter at Sipol or SIPL, and a VLF receiver in northern Quebec at Roberval were part of this early research. The data they collected were surprising. First, the signal received in Quebec immediately after transmission from Antarctica was larger than expected. The waves broadcasted from Antarctica were not only triggering new emissions from particles in the magnetosphere, but were being amplified more than 1,000-fold in the magnetosphere before returning to Earth and being received in Quebec. Only half a watt of broadcast power was required in order to be detected near the opposite pole of the Earth after being relayed from the magnetosphere. The second surprise was that Roberval was receiving frequencies that were unrelated to the frequencies that originated at SIPO, but that were instead multiples of 60 hertz. The SIPO signal had been altered on its journey through outer space to bear the imprint of the electric power grid. Now, this is really important. So as it's moving through the magnetosphere, it's literally collecting the imprint of the very low frequency from the power grid, right? So it's no longer capturing VLF from nature, from the earth, you know, all of the natural cycles. It's now capturing it from this artificial grid. Carrying on. Since those first discoveries, scientists have learned that a great deal about this form of pollution, now known as power line harmonic radiation. It appears that harmonics from all of the world's power grids leak continuously into the magnetosphere, where they are greatly amplified as they bounce back and forth between the northern and southern hemisphere, generating their own rising and falling whistlers, just like radiation from lightning. Right? So we're hearing all these, for those that are sensitive, like we're hearing no longer all this, just these natural, these natural waves of energy, but we're also hearing all these artificial waves. Okay, so, but there is a fundamental difference. So before 1889, whistlers and other lightning-triggered sounds played continuously over the entire range of the terrestrial instrument. Today, the music is stilted, dulled, and confined to multiples of 50 or 60 hertz. Every component of the natural symphony has been radically altered. The dawn chorus is quieter on Sundays than on other days of the week, and the starting frequencies of most chorus emissions are power line harmonics. It seems likely that the entire hiss band is caused by power line radiation, wrote Halliwell in 1975. And the natural slow pulsations of the Earth's magnetic field below 1 hertz, which are also important to all life, are strongest on weekends, evidently because they are being suppressed by radiation from the power grid, and this radiation is strongest on weekdays. Anthony Fraser Smith, also at Stanford, by analyzing geomagnetic activity data collected since 1868, showed that this is not a new phenomenon, but has been happening since the first use of alternating current and has been increasing over time. Data collected between 1958 and 1992 show that PC1 activity, representing geomagnetic pulsations between 0.2 and 5 hertz, has been 15 to 20% greater on weekends than in the middle of the week. The structure of the Van Allen radiation belt seems also to have been altered. What the Department of Defense has wanted to do intentionally was apparently already being done massively by the world's electric power grid. Why? Physicists had long wondered, are there two electron-filled radiation belts around the Earth, an inner and an outer, separated by a layer that is virtually empty of electrons? This electron slot, some think, is continually drained of its electrons by their interactions with radiation from power lines. These electrons, in turn, raining down over the Earth, modifying the electrical properties of the atmosphere. Not only may this increase the frequency of thunderstorms, but it may shift the value of the Schumann resonance to which all things are attuned. Now we can just, before I jump onto this last paragraph, like we've been observing the Schumann resonance, readers and looking at really wild and crazy patterns that have come in recently. So we can attribute a lot of that to these artificial grids. In short, the electromagnetic environment of the entire Earth is radically different today from what it was before 1889. That's not that long ago. Satellite observations show that radiation originating from power lines often overwhelms natural radiation from lightning. Power line radiation is so intense that atmospheric scientists lament their inability to do fundamental research. There is almost nowhere left on Earth, or even in space, where a VLF receiver can be used to study natural phenomenon. So we can't even study natural phenomenon anymore because there's no VLF receiver that can actually capture these natural waves because of the artificial grid that's in place. Lastly, under natural conditions as they existed before 1889, intense VLF activity leading to electron rain and the shifting of the Schumann resonances occurred only during magnetic storms. Today, magnetic storms never ends. So that is the end of that chapter. And I think there's a lot of information in there, right, to help people start understanding things from an expanded state of awareness, really where we're looking at, how we're connected to the cosmos, how we're connected to these artificial grids. Really, a lot of it has to do with people's lack of education and understanding about how these things are affecting us, and the desire, that humans have had towards progress, and going in there and doing all sorts of playing around with the magnetosphere, with the ionosphere, just shooting all sorts of frequencies in there, to both it's both related to like just communication, global communications, but also global surveillance methods, and just going in there and doing whatever they want has gotten us to the point where we can no longer even distinguish the natural versus the artificial when we're studying it, because they're kind of affecting each other. And it's a war, right? It's like this electrical war that's taking place on Earth between the natural and the artificial, VLFs and ULFs and so on and so forth. So I find it very difficult. There's hardly any place to go anymore where there's no electricity. But when the electricity does go off and, on the whole block, or the electricity blows during a storm, I invite you to just pay attention to the silence and the sounds that start coming in, those earth song frequencies that start coming in and reconnecting you to the natural rhythm, reconnecting your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your experience of time and space to something that is natural and expanded, it's cosmic. And obviously when that electricity comes back on, you're going to hear the buzzing, of all the appliances, but just the grid itself. And it's really difficult to find places where you can go where you just have that complete silence. And so imagine, what having a cell phone in your hand all day can do to you. Like, we already have this stuff with just the dirty electricity and then the cell phone towers and all of this stuff. And then imagine taking that and really taking it even closer to you, and then all these projects, these human trials that are going on where people are actually putting it inside their bodies is, even scarier to the understanding of how our bodies are naturally synchronized to the cosmos, specifically so that we can be healthy and that we can stay in rhythm with all of nature, right? So that we're in harmony with all of nature. So removing that is really removing ourselves from nature. And I think the awareness going out there, people really starting to pay attention to this stuff. There might be a little bit of a discomfort at first, really understanding how far we've gone with this and how far off track we've gone with everything regarding technology, and looking at how we need to correct. But coming back with this understanding can also give us courage to really face making the changes that we have to make, and being responsible about, staying in that community and that harmonious connection with all of life. So I really invite everyone to go and pick up a copy of this book. Again, it's The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life, Arthur Firstenberg. And if you'd like to contact me for a session specifically talking about if you're someone who is sensitive to electromagnetic energy, sounds, everything to do with tones. I know a lot of people have had the experience when they start opening up their, just their awareness to start connecting with all this stuff, it gets amplified. So feel free to contact me. I have lots of tips on, how to manage that and stay healthy and not be able to stay functional amidst all of the artificial frequencies that are around us. So I hope everyone is well. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.